Money makes you think. Hi, I'm your host Aditi Anand, a teenager who frankly has a lot of questions about how finance works. Today, we're going to be talking about a series of unfortunate collapses in the banking industry. Part 1, SVB. Okay, so if you've been living under a rock, you probably have no idea what I'm talking about, and you're blanking out or panicking. If you do know what I'm talking about, you're either reaching for your conspiracy string board or withdrawing your money from your European bank account. No matter which category you're in, know that you've been excused. I'll help you out in getting a picture of what's been happening for some time now and what's going on in the banking and finance industry. Sort of give you this insight about the series of unfortunate events that have unfolded, number one, over a span of 48 hours that led to the second biggest bank collapse in US history, aka SVB, which we're talking about today. And number two, over a weekend that undid 147-year-old legacy as a bank for the wealthy. That's Credit Suisse. We're going to talk about that in the next episode. And number three, what's in line for the industry. That's also going to be over the next few episodes. So again, like I said, this episode we're focusing in on SVB. Now, I'm going to need you to recall and rewind what happened pre-COVID. We need to rewind all the way back. The Fed, the Federal Reserve, maintained interest rates at around 1.75%. The Fed, by the way, is the central banking system in the US. They control things like interest rates, they regulate financial markets, and manage money supply. The interest rates then were much higher than what they were in the pandemic, and you'll see why this specific measure is integral to the entire collapse of SVB. So, higher interest rates meant that loans that individuals or businesses took from banks were expensive because you had to pay relatively higher interest each year that you took out this loan. So lots of people tried saving more in their savings account. That's an account that you deposit money into to earn an interest on top of it, or just keeping it in their regular current accounts where they just deposit money and don't earn anything on top of it. To really understand all of this, we need to dig a little deeper and see it from the bank's perspective, where we come to understand that banks really do operate as businesses that aim to make, you guessed it, profit. Deposits come into the bank through current accounts where customers keep deposits and don't earn anything on it, and also savings accounts where banks pay customers interest for keeping the money there. The important thing to distinguish is that this isn't their profit and this isn't even their revenue. This is a liability because banks are entitled to pay these amounts back to customers whenever customers withdraw them. Their actual revenue comes from using customers' deposits, the money that they've been putting into the bank, to provide it as loans to other individuals and businesses where they do charge interest and earn money through that, as well as buying, financial instruments like stocks and bonds, and also giving commercial services. So that's what was happening. Pre-pandemic, most banks were trying to provide loans to customers because interest rates were still higher than what they were during the pandemic, and they were making enough money, enough profit through this whole tactic. But when the pandemic rolled around and the Fed decided to lower interest rates to almost nil, loans became free to borrow. Anyone could have access to money, free money. And if banks continued running their existing models, they would be making a loss paying just the interest on customer savings and not earning any interest on loans. So instead, SVB, which is Silicon Valley Bank, pivoted by changing its proportion of revenue streams. it started investing more of its customers' deposits into 10 plus year mortgage bonds. Well, invested more is a bit of an understatement. It was a staggering 700% increase from how much they had previously invested in these bonds before the pandemic. I know, a bold move. The bond yield was around 1.5%, and subtracting interest that they paid customers for savings, this left them a pretty solid profit. Their decisions would have been justified because bonds have been known for a really long time to be on the safer side of investments. It's given the fact that their yields are low, this indicates low risk, low reward, and that they barely move up or down in price given their stability compared to something like stocks, which are considered more volatile. But, and this is a big exception, they are affected by interest rates at the end of the day. Starting to connect the dots now? No? Okay, how about this? What did the Fed do in February 2023 during their meeting? Actually, hold on. What have they been doing since March of 2022? That's right, increasing interest rates. Okay, so before I get into the rest of the story, I have brought in again our special guest from all our previous episodes, Amita. Hi, Amita. What do you want to say to the audience?
Hello.
Okay, so I brought you here today, and we're kind of doing like this Jeopardy, Who Wants to Be a Millionaire kind of thing. And yeah, I will be giving you the questions and a couple of multi-choice answers. And you're gonna get to pick from one of them, and we'll see how many you actually get right. Are you ready for it?
Yep, yes.
Let's get started. Drum roll, please. Question 1. When did the Fed most recently hike interest rates? So, which of the months so far, Jan, Feb, March, did the Fed most recently hike interest rates?
January? Because it's the start of the year.
Is that your final answer?
Yeah.
You're wrong. It was actually this month. It was March after the SVB collapse. Okay. Second question. Let's move on. By how many percentage points did they hike interest rates? A, 0.5, option B, 0.1, option C, 0.25, or option D, 0.4 percentage points. So that's 0.5, 0.1, 0.25, or 0.4. Did you read the news on this one?
No. Is it option D?
You sure? You're wrong. It's option C, 0.25. But you were close enough in terms of the options. Okay, question 3. How long has SVB been operating for? So how long have they been doing their business? A, 40 years, B, 20 years, C, 50 years, and D, 25 years. I think I mentioned this once before to you. You might remember. You might recall.
I don't. Is it... I'm guessing 20 years.
20 years? Are you sure?
Yep. No.
Okay. You're wrong. It's actually 40 years. It's A. Question 4. Do you know what percentage of Forbes 2022 Next Billion Dollar Startups were SVB clients? So how many of the most successful startups actually banked with SVB? How many do you think?
In hundreds or
As a percentage.
no options?
No options this time. I thought you would be getting the hang of this game by now.
50%.
It's actually 88%.
88% of businesses?
88% of Forbes' 2022 next billion-dollar startups.
Interesting.
Okay, and I also wanted to continue the theme that we have going on for you for literally every single episode that we've called you. This graph.
No.
Because you seem to be a person who really likes to talk about numbers, visuals, and data. Alright, Amita, are you ready? Hold on, the image is downloading. Okay, so can you just describe this graph to me and what you make of it?
Which one?
Both.
So the graph shows a list of banks and the percentage of uninsured deposits and deposits that are loans or held to maturity securities. And from the graph, I can see SVB, Silicon Valley Bank, is the second in both categories, with 94% for both.
So what do you think that 94% translates to in terms of this graph?
I'm not sure.
So like how 94% of deposits in the bank were uninsured, so they weren't insured by the FDIC, and that 94% of the deposits were loans that were actually held maturity securities. So those were the investments that SVB made, the long-term mortgage bonds that they bought.
Okay.
What I was hoping for you to get out of this graph was the fact that so many of the banks that we see over here were the ones that were being heavily discussed on news and speculation going around on which ones would collapse. And of course, we know Silicon Valley Bank collapsed from this graphic, and then also Signature Bank 2 days after. Did you hear about that one?
Yeah.
Okay. And a couple of other ones as well. There was speculation on First Republic Bank. So yeah, quite a few of the banks in this graphic actually were heavily discussed during that time. And I'll definitely link it in the description of this podcast. So yeah, that's it. You did well for, I guess, your first time answering sort of these kind of questions. How did you feel about how you did?
I feel like I need to read and catch up more on the SVB Bank collapse.
Well, that's great to know. It's helping you to get motivated to learn more about what's going on in the news. And I hope next time when you come back, you're going to come back with a lot more enthusiasm to answer these questions and to describe more graphs. Okay, I'll see you next time, Amita. Thank you for joining us.
Bye.
Bye. Alright, the last piece of the puzzle is how interest rates affect bond prices. Right, the bonds that SVB bought a lot of. An increase in the interest rates that the Fed was doing from March all the way to Feb of 2023 meant that a fall in bond prices occurred. That means A, SVB could have bought bonds for much cheaper for the same yield or even higher if they bought it later on. And B, these potential bonds that they could have invested in, they could have invested them for less than 10 plus years. Less than the time that they need to hold the bonds that they currently have, the mortgage bonds. So SVB didn't make a really good choice with that one. They lack diversification in means of increasing their profit during what could be said as a tumultuous time for many businesses and individuals, the pandemic, of course. They invested in long-term mortgage bonds with the belief that the Fed wouldn't increase interest rates anytime soon. I think most of us did. As long as these numbers, your assets and liabilities, are part of your balance sheet, which, by the way, is legally required by businesses to do so, people and organizations will spot something wrong eventually, and their speculation can lead to something as big as the SVB collapse. Side note, you can actually check out SVB's real balance sheet on the internet. Search it up after this. SVB did collapse. Thursday, 9th of March, its stock price fell by 60% after they announced that they were attempting to raise capital of $2 billion. They failed, and I guess investors started getting the memo since Wednesday and Thursday of the same week, the haunting 48 hours before the crash landing, there was a run on the bank. Now, a run on the bank is when your angry customers come up to the bank and demand their deposits back, usually because they have some inkling that the bank doesn't actually have their money. Yeah, I know, kind of a reverse psychology thing, but hey, that's human psychology for you. SVB was forced to liquidate during this time by selling off as much of its mortgage bonds as possible, and sadly having to realize its losses, the loss that they knew they would make if they sold their precious investment. And remember, many of these bonds were still being held because they were long-term bonds. SVB eventually collapsed on the 10th of March 2023, Friday. The important question after all of this is, did people actually end up getting their money back? Well, over that fateful weekend after the dramatic turn of events, people didn't really know what to expect. They knew that the FDIC, the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, guaranteed deposits up to $250,000 would be insured. This meant that customers could claim insurance on it if the amount of money they had deposited was within this limit. But then again, another issue propped up, and this one was specific to SVB. Their clients were VCs, venture capitalists, alongside tech companies and startups, Silicon Valley people. You get the idea from the bank's name. And so their accounts held way more than $250,000, the limit for how much gets insured. But thankfully, the Treasury came to the rescue and said that it would transfer customers' money to the Deposit Insurance National Bank of Santa Clara, where customers would have access to their rightful deposits. Another crucial element, actually, is that this time the government didn't use bailouts from taxpayers' money to fund this. This is actually what happened during the 2008 financial crisis. So that's a bit of a distinction from that event. Instead, this time it was entirely funded by tests that banks usually pay the government and also interest on government investments. It's crazy to think that there are still happy endings for some stakeholders in this story. Customers got to get their deposits back, the government pivoted and did its best to prevent this from massively impacting the economy. First Citizens Bank just recently bought SVB loans worth $72 billion at a discount, of course, from the government, which gives the opportunity for these customers to now operate as normal, now with First Citizens Bank instead of SVB. But there are still negative impacts, and these stakeholders who were affected are the retail investors who made a loss with their SVB stock investments, and of course all the employees at SVB. Who knows? Maybe its collapse even triggered a chain reaction. And that's it. That sums up the whole SVB collapse story, and I think that really opens up a lot of questions about, how this is going to affect other sorts of banks across different territories, across different continents, and that's why we're going to be hopping over to Europe in the next episode in this exciting series. We're going to be talking about Credit Suisse. A famous person once said that history likes to repeat itself. Well, in this series, we'll see how they were not all that wrong. Thank you for listening to this episode, and I'll catch you in the next one. Bye!